Well, we're certainly stocking up this week, stocking up with 40 different meat items. Everyone is on sale. I hope you stock up too. Use that Woodward's charge card.
Both operations
get some great sales in the meat department.
L&K
And here's one of them.
and Sooke Forest Products.
Ground beef, 99 cents a pound, $2.18 a kilogram if you'd rather. And if you wreck the hamburgers, got ketchup, Heinz for $2.49, a big bottle.
Woodward's has it all. We're coming through for you.
Good morning. If you borrow money from a bank, whether you're a corner store owner or a fairly good-sized lumber or a giant lumber operation, that bank has got to get its money back with interest. It's got to have its pound of flesh. But the problem we're facing in British Columbia today is one that nobody really talks about. Are the banks going to close down British Columbia? Any time of recession such as we have now, where operations are managed to squeeze bank, if you don't make your payments to the banks, in they come, exert their authority to which you have agreed, take over your operation, run it perhaps, or maybe just close it down. Now, there are lumber operations in BC who are not here this morning who owe the banks hundreds of millions of dollars. And these banks are these companies employing thousands of men are operating for the moment because the banks, and I say this without fear of contradiction, dare not call their notes. The economic devastation would be too severe for the people of British Columbia. So where do the banks become visible? The banks become visible in the smaller operations. And when the note becomes overdue and becomes untenable to perhaps the eastern officials of the bank, they call the notes, and that's that. Meanwhile, hundreds of men are left biting their nails on the sidelines. Some of them have worked for 20, 30, 35 years, and what have they got? They're not even sure they're going to get their holiday pay. They're not sure they're going to get their severance pay. And today's climate, they're quite confident that they cannot get another job. A few years ago, if a mill was closed down and 400 men were put out of work, these 400 men could be placed in the same area in reasonably short order. Now, when a man gets laid off, he knows there's damn little prospect of getting a job. This program is not an attack on the banks, but it's an information program. And we're going to deal specifically this morning with 3 operations which have seen the end of the careers, not only for the management, but between 460 and 500 men. These are L&K Lumber in North Vancouver, whose plant has been auctioned and is being disposed of forthwith, where the employees are looking for $250,000 in holiday pay and $1.3 million in severance pay. Then that's in North Vancouver. And then there are 2 operations, Sooke Forest Products in Victoria and Lamford Cedar in New Westminster, presently going through the agonies of the tangles with the banks who are running these 2 operations, and where if the end comes, there'll be $4 million owed to the employees of those operations. A tricky one to look at, but we have, I think, the information to give to you this morning so you can understand it. And we're going to start just with a word or two from a report Steve Wyatt has done on what happens to the men who lose their jobs when these things occur.
They took my job away. I got a wife and 2 kids. I got many debts. I got a loan with these people here, and they expect me to pay it. They're phoning me, wanting to take what I own and whatnot. And
what do you hope to accomplish here today?
My job. I want my job back.
That's it. Economic recession or not, people want jobs. Who have we got in the studio this morning? Well, we have Hershell Smith, the owner of Sooke Forest Products in Lamford Cedar. That's number one. We have Gary Young, who is a trustee of Pete Marwick Limited, who is handling the unhappy affairs of L&K Lumber in North Vancouver. We have Roger Lewis, president of the I.W.A. Local 118 in Victoria. He's involved, of course, in Sooke Forest Products. We have Terry Smith, president of Local 1357 New Westminster, who's concerned about Sooke and Lamford Cedar. And we have Doug Evans, the president of the I.W.A. Local 1217 in Vancouver, who's involved in L&K Lumber. First, though, a report from Steve Wyatt of the men on the jobs and what's happening out there and what's happening about the picketing at the banks, two banks, Bank of Nova Scotia, which is involved in L&K Lumber, and the Toronto Dominion, which is involved in the Sooke Forest Products affair. Steve Wyatt's report after the break.
Jack L&K Lumber in North Vancouver is being taken apart piece by piece. It is bankrupt and was ordered sold after its main creditor, the Bank of Nova Scotia, called in a $30 million debt. It is a sad end to a long history. L&K started here in 1937. Now 160 people are out of work, adding to the long list 20,000 strong of I.W.A. members already unemployed. And the men here say they are owed more, nearly $2 million in severance pay and holiday pay being held back, they say, by the Bank of Nova Scotia. And now those men who spent most of their working lives here are taking on the Big Eastern Bank. How many years did you work for L&K?
26.
26 years. What are you doing now?
Nothing. Can't find a job.
What were you told?
All over.
What were you told when the company went down? Were you promised anything?
No, we got laid off, and then after we got laid off, then they sent us a letter to say that the company was bankrupt. They put a receivership in there, and the receivership done everything, even destroyed the mill where we used to work so many years. Now they put machinery on action, and now we don't have any job, no mill to go back to work, nothing.
So with no mill to go to, these men take their protest to the glittering head offices of the Bank of Nova Scotia. Last week their workplace disappeared, put on the auctioneer's block.
24 now 5, 5 25, 24 now 25, 25 now 26, 26, 26, 26 now 7, 7 27, and 27, and 27, yes or no? All through a 2600, any advance from 2600, all through a 26.
And gone after 20 to 30 years service are 160 employees. It was a family operation, noted for its labor peace. Now some of the men who got their first job here are back bidding on the machinery that's left. It will retrieve only a fraction of the overall debt.
We're anticipating that the sale will do somewhere around 600,000 if things go the way they have gone today.
How much would that compare, do you suppose, for the, I don't know, the value of the mill? Would that retrieve about 50% of its actual value, do you think? Or?
Nowhere near that, really. I would say it's several million if you were to build a mill new today. So we're not really anywhere near replacement.
It will not go far toward paying off the $30 million owed to the Bank of Nova Scotia, nor will it meet the $1.8 million these men say they are owed in holiday and severance pay. How much money are you owed, do you think?
Well, I've been there 22 years, and 1 year's holiday pay.
Everybody seems to have worked there for such an extraordinarily long
years into there, 22 years, and 1 full year's holiday pay. And we haven't got a penny, not 1 penny.
After 22 years?
After 22 years.
Is it unusual that so many people would work for so many years for a mill?
Well, it was a good company to work for, and I mean, we enjoyed it, eh? I mean, we thought we had it till we retired, that, you know, we'd have a job there till retirement, but it didn't work out that way, you know.
Well,
one day we came back and bang, we don't have a job. We got a phone call, they're in bankruptcy, and what are you going to do after 20?
What did they tell you that day when you found out it was bankrupt?
Well, what had actually happened is we went down last December, and the word we kept getting is that the mill would start up. There were people looking at it to buy it. And then I believe it was, what, April? April, just all of a sudden, we got the word it went bankrupt.
And also what happened, like Pete Marwick, which were the receivers.
Receivers, yeah.
We get a letter in the mail informing us that we're terminated. after 22 years for no, just that was it. We were terminated. Then we get another letter saying that our medical and everything was terminated. That there we are at the end of April. No medical. We got a family now too, and what are you going to do for medical?
I think you can see as you look around here the age of the fellas, and I mean, where are you going to get a job?
All we're asking for is what we got coming. Nothing more.
What's happening in the negotiations with the bank? Have you had any luck so far in getting this money out of them?
We've had absolutely no luck.
What's their position? What are they telling you?
Well, the receiver phoned me when we picketed the Bank of Nova Scotia, North Vancouver, and he asked if I wanted a meeting with the vice president of the bank. I said, anytime, any day, we will have a meeting. That is the last I heard from him.
Jack, what options are open to the union to get the fellas their money?
Well, I think at this point in time, and I think it's a sad commentary, we're out relying on the public, the media, to put some pressure on this bank to say, look, these are good, honest-to-goodness workers that belong to a responsible union who really helped build the economy of this province, and this is a reward that they get. After years and years and years, the bank says to hell with your holiday pay that they earned in 1983, to hell with your severance pay that the collective agreement calls for. The federal government, the provincial government, we talked to them. The license from this government says that they have to run a manufacturing facility or they haven't got any logs. The minister says you can tear down the mill, you can auction the equipment, you can keep the logs, log them, and export them to some other country. It's a bloody disgrace.
The Toronto Dominion Bank got the same message the next day, but here the workers are from Sooke Forest Products. 2 mills, one on the island and one in New Westminster, are on the threshold of being shut down.
They took my job away. I got a wife and 2 kids. I got many debts. I got a loan with these people here, and they expect me to pay it. They're phoning me, wanting to take what I own and whatnot. And
what do you hope to accomplish here today?
My job. I want my job back. I want to work.
Lamford Cedar Products in New Westminster. It has been idle since November 9th. Until then, it was recognized, even by the bank which financed it, as one of the more efficient coastal mills. But depressed markets first shut down the mill here and on Vancouver Island last July. The bank granted 2 extensions on its loan, but it has now given up on the market.
The issue with us is the big eastern banks coming into British Columbia and shutting it down. We feel right now that we're really caught behind the 8 ball.
When you go in there, what message do you have for the bank?
Open the mill up, get these people back to work. They're a good crew. They've worked for the company for a long time, and let's keep the plant going.
With that, some of the 300 men who are out of work marched into the bank. They lined up to speak with their closest counterparts in the banking business, the tellers.
Have you read this?
Yeah, I read it already.
What's your opinion of that?
It's too bad.
The bank called our note, and forcing us out of work.
Has nothing to do with the tellers, though.
No, but your jobs could be next.
I guess so.
Apparently, we're all employed by the TD Bank.
Is there someone from the TD Bank who could talk to us about this issue involving Lamford Cedar Products? Is there someone upstairs you could recommend to us? A head man?
Not really.
Regional manager? What's the regional?
It's not with this office, that's all.
What's the regional manager's name in BC?
Bill McIntosh.
Bill McIntosh? Does he work in this building upstairs? Okay, thank you.
We asked Bill McIntosh at the Toronto Dominion Bank to talk about this protest by the I.W.A, but he declined with cameras present. He did provide, however, a press release, in which he points out that the bank has been providing financing to the company since 1979. But since October 1982, it has not paid interest on its debt. The release reads in part, "In the face of continuing operating losses, inability to pay interest, and a resultant heavy debt load, together with at best an uncertain outlook for the lumber industry, the bank was forced to withdraw its support and to take the necessary action to recover the maximum amount from the company's assets, which are worth substantially less than the existing bank loans. That does not explain much to the I.W.A.
It's not satisfactory. The Vancouver Sun a week ago ran an article showing the losses. We understand that. This union has got the highest production in that operation they've ever had. I mean, there's a lot of things that aren't said here. The fact of the matter is, where does this stop? Is it McMillan Bloedel tomorrow? Is it Wanik? Is it Dolmans? Is it Canfor? Who's next? 300 jobs. That's the problem. We understand they can't. They're losing money, and if you're losing money in a tough economic period, that is no grounds to put 300 people out of work, considering that everybody else is losing money in the industry.
Is this one small example of a larger problem in the eastern banks and the forest industry?
We don't know how they make decisions.
You know, when Chrysler got into trouble, you know, there was efforts to save that company. It was successful. You know, there's far more employees in the forest industry in British Columbia than there is in 5 Chryslers in Eastern Canada. You know, that's the problem we see. Where is tomorrow, you know? Yesterday, L&K. Today, Sooke Forest Products. Which bank are we at tomorrow, and which hundreds of people are put out of work and with no expectations of employment? That's what the fight's all about.
So these woodworkers sat in the marble-lined offices asking the TD for their jobs.
We want our jobs. We want our jobs. We want our jobs.
Next, we're going to find out if, in fact, when a bank takes over and runs an operation, as happened at Sooke and Lamford, whether it runs it efficiently, whether it runs it full-time, whether it only runs it part-time, whether it closes down arbitrarily part of an operation that could have brought in millions of dollars, and what security there is eventually if the plants don't reopen for the I.W.A. members to get their severance pay. And the man we'll talk to about that is Hershell Smith, the president of Sooke Forest Products, after the break.
Time.
It's just a pity we don't have Mr. Armour of the Bank of Nova Scotia, the regional manager, and Mr. McIntosh of the Toronto Dominion Bank here this morning. But we'll do our best to present their side as fairly as we can. But I'm going to start with Hershell Smith, the president of Sooke Forest Products, and that includes Lamford Cedar, doesn't it?
That's correct.
Now, you can't expect the bank to do anything else but to seize a debenture if you don't pay the interest. Is that correct, Mr. Smith?
That is their option.
Now, what have they done wrong, or what should have been done, or what have you tried to do on your own to preserve these efficient operations?
When they notified us back in July that they were withdrawing their support from the bank, I immediately started out to see whether or not we could arrange other financing. I contacted the Tom Waterland, the Minister of Forestry. I saw Hugh Curtis, Minister of Finance. I approached 8 different banks in the province of British Columbia. I approached the credit union. I talked to various individuals as far away as London to see if we could get support.
But what were you able to tell them as to why Sooke should be allowed to continue? I'm going to ask you in a minute how the bank has run the operation, but what's positive about it? Because if the world's gone to hell in a handbasket, we can expect everything to collapse. What's different about Sooke and Lamford?
Jack, if I may go back to 1982, the bank, and I give them full credit for this, came in and they had a survey made of both mills and said that they were prepared, and they did at that time enter into a program to spend $4 million at Sooke and approximately $500,000 at Lamford to modernize the plants. And out of that modernization, we now have at Sooke the highest recovery mill in British Columbia. There isn't a mill that can touch it. From a wood recovery point of view, we get 9.1 board feet of lumber per cubic feet of wood.
That's 50% better than any other, than the average mill.
The average mill on the coast would not be 6. So we're getting 50% more wood out of 1,000 feet of logs or a cubic foot of wood than any other mill on the coast.
But then the markets went to hell.
Then the markets went to hell.
Did you still have customers?
We still have customers. We were processing wood and supplying our customers all through the piece.
With the drop of the price of logs, therefore, would a good businessman like yourself or a banker in Newey's business say, we can afford to carry this for a bit longer?
I think all that had to happen, or what did happen, and I give, first of all, credit to the bank, they provided the funds, but they did not provide us with the working capital for the company to succeed. And we have run for 2 years on the basis of a 50% production. We're rated at 100 million. We can produce that yearly, and we have produced 50 million. In other words, we've worked 2 weeks out of every month. To be actual, we worked 2 weeks and we'd shut down for 3. Now I ask you, could BC Forest Products or Macmillan Bedell or any other company work on the basis of 50% of their capacity?
But who made you work 2 weeks, shut down 2 weeks, 3 weeks, shut down 2 weeks?
The Toronto Dominion Bank. The policy there was they controlled us and they set up the funds. As an example, when we came to start up production, the bank said, we'll give you enough money to buy 2 weeks' logs. process those logs, saw them up, ship them to Lamford, process it again, sell it, get in the money, and tell us if you made a profit. If you made a profit, we'll go forward. And we did make a profit, even on that helter-skelter system, and that's the way we've been operating for the last 2 years.
But does that not indicate that the bank doesn't know a damn thing about running a lumber company when it takes over?
I say the bank understands the banking business, but they certainly don't understand the sawmill business.
Yeah, is it a fact that you had another profitable operation which was arbitrarily closed down, which could have brought in a lot of money to Sooke Forest Products?
We had formed up back in June a new company, a research company, and we have been doing research, which I will touch on. And we had formed this company. We had a takeout on the thing on a research credit grant, which would have provided us with $4,200,000.
Cash flow.
Cash flow of $300,000 a month. And when they lowered the boom the day in question, we asked them whether or not this company, they wanted this to go forward, and they said no. Cancel the whole thing. It's dead.
Just absolutely killed it, stone dead.
Right,
Again,
stone dead.
That's another example of a bank not knowing how to run a lumber company. Am I correct in that?
I would say yes.
Now, where do you go from here? At the moment, the bank is attempting to petition you into bankruptcy for a total debt of more than $30 million.
Yes, closer to 50.
Closer to $50 million.
Including all interest, and the interest, of course, is all compounded. And you got to think of the problem that people are in today. A lot of our interest and our problems go back to when we were paying 23% interest. In other words, our debt was rolling over every 3 years and doubling.
Oh, you mean in the good old days for the banks, when they were loaning money to Argentina and Brazil and all these other places?
That's correct.
You piled up on your cash flow loans, on your operating loans, 23% interest.
That's right.
And that you're still trying to catch up. Don't they forgive you? They
don't forgive anything.
Every single solitary nickel.
If you went in today and said, we'll pay you off, they'd sit down and figure out how much it compounded since yesterday.
You'd be about $50 million.
Oh, more than that, probably.
More than $50 million. Now, what about the severance pay and the holiday pay for the men? You've paid all your wages up to date.
We've paid while we've been running, but the severance pay is still outstanding, and the I.W.A. have initiated a case which is to be heard by the Labor Relations Board on the 28th and the 29th of this month, which will deal with this. And hopefully it will be resolved in favor of the men. I strongly feel that that has to happen.
This is the secret kicker and everything. The I.W.A., correct me if I'm wrong, is making an application to Labor Board that when a bank takes over an operation and runs it, which is what's happened to your operation, that they become the successor employer under the contract.
That's right.
And must live up to the contract.
That's correct.
And if the I.W.A. wins that application to the Labor Board, the bank, Dominion Bank, would then become the contract employer, would have to fulfill the contract in every way, shape, or form.
That's correct.
Well, I can foresee, you correct me if I'm wrong, you're the businessman, that if that succeeds, the banks would either close operations down on the debentures without running them, or not close them down because of the fear of taking over the obligations of the contract.
I say they'll make a greater effort to keep companies running than to arbitrarily shut them down.
If the successor rights go to the bank.
That is correct.
Because at the moment, if a bank just closes a place, the successor rights die.
That's right.
What about, supposing you are unhappily forced into total closure, is that the next step from the bank?
Yes, they then must, if the thing goes, and I said there was a court case on it yesterday, and it is now being, the ruling on the case will be probably given by this weekend, and then the bank would have to resubmit a petition to put us back into bankruptcy.
And on the face of it, they've got every right to say, goodbye, Sooke Forest Products, and take the lot.
That is correct.
All the corporate assets. They'll take everything.
That's right.
Now, if your men are laid off, give me the little financial sum on the gains and loss to the economy here on UIC.
Well, one of the problems in going to various banks, they would ask me what we could put up in the way of equity capital. And as all the money involved in this thing is out front, I could not come forward with that equity. I took this up with the federal government, and I want to just run these figures by you. If the total plants are shut down, the unemployment insurance charged is $300,000 a month.
That's what the men would collect.
That's what the men would collect. These are just rough figures.
Ballpark figures.
Ballpark figures. At the same time, if the company were running and each individual was paying his income taxes to the federal government, the deductions overall from the company would amount to $300,000.
So that's a $600,000
There's
flip.
$600,000 a month that the federal government is losing on the swing. That's $7 million a year, just looking at this. We asked the federal government, we asked the provincial government whether they would come forward and just back our loan. Similarly, they did to Chrysler or they did to Massey Ferguson, just guarantee it. And they would immediately save the $7 million, even if we went bad again, they would save that money in 1 year from what it's costing them today. It's absolutely ridiculous. At the same time, when we go down, when our 300, and I'm not talking about the women and the children, which I feel dearly about, but there are 5 other employees in this province that are affected because there's a multiplier effect in our company, the tugboat people, the truck drivers, you name it, there's a multiplier of 5. Multiply that in there, and now you're talking about the federal government on this thing, or somebody, the revenues are $35 million a year when you shut that plant down, or those plants.
And this is a plant which can stay in business and at least break even in the present
We're
market.
as efficient, and we have the highest recovery in British Columbia, and why can't we operate? And why can't we get together and put this thing back into place?
I want to stress one thing again. You're saying that a $7 million guarantee would enable you to operate now.
Right today. Any bank we went to, and I went to 9 of them, if I'd have had that guarantee from anybody, the banks would have jumped behind this thing and we'd be back in business and running today.
And you've asked the federal government?
I've asked the federal government.
And no response, of course, from the provincial government?
No response.
Have you asked them?
From either government.
$7 million guarantee would keep Sooke Forest Products and Lamford Cedar going right now.
We could start up Monday morning.
It's scandalous, isn't it?
And they're going to lose that, plus all the other people that are being hurt indirectly on this thing, which totals $35 million. Now, that doesn't make sense to me.
And when you think of the guarantees to Canadair and de Havilland and the rest of them, it just about makes you upchuck.
That's correct.
Well, Hershell Smith, president of Sooke Forest Products. We're going to be joined now to deal a bit more with the Sooke Forest Products in Lamford, with Terry Smith of 357 New Westminster and Roger Lewis, 118, that's I.W.A, of course, in Victoria, after the break. Nobody denies that there is a crisis in the country and that the banks have got to get their pound of flesh. It's a question of how reasonable their actions are and how negligent the government would appear to be in attempting to save vital jobs in British Columbia, which is a long way from Oshawa, Ontario. Now, I have now with me, I've got Terry Smith of 1357 and Roger Lewis of 118 in Victoria. Anything you want to add, first of all, on your attitude? Is the union prepared to cooperate all the way under the contract to try and get this plant going again?
We are prepared to do anything possible to get that contract, that operation going.
How about you, Roger?
Same thing. We're concerned about the jobs.
Now, what about your individuals? How do your men feel about this? We saw a little bit on Steve's program this morning.
Well, our crews are prepared to do whatever is necessary to get their jobs back. The fight is over jobs, and they've got nothing to lose.
What about the pickets? Why are you picketing the plants in New Westminster?
Well, we are concerned that the severance pay, of course, we're also concerned about the operation. There is adequate inventory there to cover the severance pay. If that inventory leaves, obviously, then I guess there's some question of severance pay there if we could ever recover it. On the other hand, we're not particularly interested in seeing the operation torn apart and shipped out of there either.
No, you've got pickets on Lamford Cedar right now.
Yes.
And these pickets are protecting the cash assets of the stock there. Is that right?
That's right.
So that eventually, if it is sold, you will get the money from it. That brings me to you. How does that work from your point of view? Is that the kind of cash guarantee that they will get the severance pay if you are in bankruptcy?
No, it doesn't follow that at all. the receiver is in there now, and if any of that lumber is sold, the money would go to the bank. Doesn't necessarily go to the severance pay. And I think that is why the union are taking the position until this whole matter is resolved through the LRB that they're going to sit on this.
What happened to the cash receipts from the operations under the on and off, open and closed running of the mills by the bank?
Since the receiver came into the company, they have received $5 million of inventory reduction in sales. That cash has gone into the bank, and not to pay bills prior to July the 24th.
In other words,
there are other creditors outstanding.
Yeah, a number of creditors outstanding, but the principal creditor is the bank.
Is the bank.
And the income tax department, I suppose, eventually will have a claim?
There are a lot of claims, but on the petition for bankruptcy, the bank were the only one that petitioned us into bankruptcy. And this came out yesterday. You must have 2 people to put you into bankruptcy. They only had 1. That's themselves.
Your other creditors were happy to sit on the sidelines, perhaps sure in the knowledge you could make a comeback.
They're not happy, but they are still in giving us what support they can.
Tell me the significance of the application to the Labour Board, Roger, on these successor rights.
Well, it'll be a first as far as we know. If we're able to convince the board that the bank is the successor, then the bank, of course, is going to have to pick up the liability for that $4 million in severance.
Would that then come ahead of any other creditors that the bank has? Your pay would then be guaranteed, I should imagine.
Well, that would be a ruling from the Labor Relations Board. We would think that they would comply with it.
Right now, how many other of your operations, many men have you got unemployed in 118 in Victoria?
I would say close to 1,000 right now.
And the 357 in New Westminster?
About 2,000, Jack.
So that's 3,000 in your 2 locals alone?
Yes.
When guys get laid off nowadays, how long does it take them to get a job in the industry?
Indefinite. Can be a year, 2 years.
How was it a few years back if an operation was burned out or closed down?
A few years back, you could probably place them within a few weeks.
Every man back in the industry?
Every man back in the industry.
When your guys, if they're all laid off permanently, as they are in these cases, when do they draw their I.W.A. pension, and is it worth an awful lot?
Well, they don't draw their pension until they're age 60, and that's, I don't know whether it's worth an awful lot or not.
All right, one other question. Are the members of the I.W.A. prepared in any way to kind of contribute if there was a proposition of bringing these mills back to active life full time? Are they prepared to put up any money? It's maybe an unfair question, but I'm going to ask it.
Well, we are prepared to sit down and talk about a whole number of things, and that may well be one of them.
What kind of things?
How to get that operation back without a whole bunch of other people losing, including the bank.
Mm-hmm. But you would be prepared to ask your guys, if necessary, if they could put up a bit to help meet the emergency guarantees at the moment.
We're prepared to have a look at it, Jack.
Anything else on your mind this morning? You were telling me, we talked about the 9 banks, we talked about Labour Board, we talked about the 4,400,000 cash flow, which the bank just closed down. We talked about the UIC, we talked about the pickets. What else?
I would like to just touch on one thing which is dear to my heart, and that is the company. We have perfected this increased recovery. And I think that this province right here should have a good look at it. We have talked to them, we've talked to the federal government on the research and recovery. I think the province is years behind in the silver culture in its planting, and I think there's a way to change this thing right around now. It takes 80 years to grow a tree, and we have neglected this thing, but we're trying to pick it up. The Council of Forest Industries came into our plant and did this survey, a copy of which I've given to you. So it's not our figures, it's the figure done by the Council of Forest Industry. And why can't we in this province, if we've got $1 billion to put into the coal business, if we've got $1 billion to put into Expo, why doesn't the province get positive about something and say, look, we'll put up a guarantee of $1 billion, and every firm can be entitled to draw on that guarantee to the sum of $4 million, which is what the bank did for us, which I think was first class. And out of that then, if we can raise the recovery in this province by 10%, Now that's not difficult because we're 30% higher than the average. If the industry could be raised, and this is all possible, we have the technology, it could be shown to somebody, and there are mills in the interior that could cooperate with it. If we can raise the technology and the recovery by 10%, that's the equivalent of 1 billion feet FBM of trees annually, which we wouldn't have to cut down, and we'd still make the same quantity of lumber. Now that's a lot of wood, because those are net trees. They're there today and we're saved till tomorrow.
I get the idea. With your 30% increased recovery, if you've got 10% in the sawmills and the manufacturing plants in British Columbia, it would use an extra 1 billion feet FBM of timber without cutting down any more trees.
Without cutting down a tree.
There's an idea for you, Premier Bennett. A simple guarantee to improve the lumber recovery rate in mills in British Columbia, and maybe you should look at a guarantee for Sooke Forest Products too, to keep these jobs instead of letting them go down the tube. What about the human element in you people? I feel terribly sorry for the older men especially. Well, how do they feel about this situation, Roger?
The older men or the younger men?
The older men.
Well, they look at where are they going to go. We've got people in Lamford that have got 30, 35 years seniority that are in their late 50s. They're looking at it, where do we go? There is no hope for a job for those people. I mean, who is going to hire somebody 57 years old? So that's just decimating for those individuals. The younger people who have got young families and mortgages on their house, that some of them even got their mortgages with the Toronto Dominion Bank. What's going to happen to those people?
Down the tube.
Down the tube. And we see in our industry what's happening with young people. You know, we see people taking their lives because there's no hope for employment. They are faced with untold pressures. This is the human aspect of it that nobody wants to talk about.
Yeah, I'm afraid not. Well, I don't know what the answer is, except that there's an obvious way to rescue some of the lumber industry in British Columbia. My thanks to Hershell. You had one other thing you wanted to say about the media, of all things.
Jack, I would like to say something. I have been in this distressing situation for 4 months. During that period of time, perhaps I've had 150 to 200 calls from either the press, the radio, or the television. And in each case, at the end of the discussion I've had, every one of them expressed to me their concern with what we were doing and the hope for the future, and wished me good luck in trying to do what I was doing. And this is my only chance. I've never met them or seen them, and I would like to say thank you for your support.
That's most unusual. When's the next crunch?
The next crunch, until we hear from the judge this Friday, we do not know what the future is. So we're on a day-to-day basis.
My thanks to Hershell Smith. Don't go away, any of you gentlemen. Roger Lewis and Terry Smith of the I.W.A. I'll be back after the break with the trustee from Pete Marwick Limited for L&K Lumber and Doug Evans of I.W.A. Local 1217. It was kind of sad to see Steve Wyatt's report on the auctioning of L&K Lumber, which has been going, I think since the early 30s, and the disposal of the assets. And I believe they actually picked up about $450,000 from all the equipment in that mill. So I want to go first to Doug Evans of the I.W.A. L&K's in your local.
In my local.
You tell me the L&K story as you see it right now, and then we'll have Gary Young, a trustee from Pete Marwick, to correct us in details and tell us what hopes there are for anything at all.
Well, L&K was a good operating mill up till about 1980. Then they started to build a new mill in Langdale, and they run into financial problems. The mill shut down last December. In March or April of this year, it was declared bankrupt. The Bank of Nova Scotia moved in, and a trustee moved in and took over the operation. At that particular time, we had meetings with the trustee. The trustee suggested to us that all of the debts incurred by L&K should be L&K's debts. He wanted to, if necessary, run the operation, and they would not be responsible for holiday pay if the mill went down, severance pay, or anything of that nature. We refused to do this. Eventually, the mill was torn down. It's been auctioned off now, and it's gone.
Now, that's a many men, 100 and...
About 160.
And you were picketing banks in North Vancouver a while ago, weren't you?
About a month ago.
What
yes.
was that for?
Well, that was the bank that had dealt with L&K for years and years. They financed them.
Did you have trouble getting checks cashed or getting checks at all?
No, there was no trouble with checks.
Mm-hmm. So where do you stand now? You've kind of given up the ghost in that one and you're sitting on the sidelines hoping you can pick up the crumbs from the table into terms of $231,000 of holiday pay and $1.3 million of severance pay.
Well, we're not trying to pick up any crumbs. We're trying to get some of the money that the Bank of Nova Scotia is making. They went to the minister and they have a forest license. Their forest license states that they must operate a manufacturing facility. In May of this year, Waterland gave the trustee an exemption. They continue to log, they export logs, they sell logs on the open market, and we say if they are going to operate as L&K, even if they are the trustee, they should pay the holiday pay and they should pay the severance pay. Up till a month ago, we only argued about holiday pay because the mill was still there and we was hoping that the market would pick up, that mill could start operating again and our members go back to work. Now the mill has been disposed of. It's going to be torn down. It's all been auctioned off. Now we say that the trustee or the Bank of Nova Scotia owes $1.5 million in severance pay.
And you have the same story of human tragedy of guys who've worked there for God knows how many years in a good operation.
It was a good operation, and we have people with 30, 35 years of service there. And the tragedy is that anyone over 45 years of age put out of work now has very, very little hope of another job.
But your story is different from Sooke in that you know now that that mill's gone forever and can't be reopened, so these jobs are gone forever.
The jobs are gone. And the tragedy, Jack, is this, that we've finally been successful in negotiating a fairly good pension plan for our members. But any member who leaves the industry for over 2 years, has a 2-year break in service, when he is 60 years old, he loses 42% of his pension. If he is 58 or 59 and there's no 2-year break, he only loses about 18% of his pension, 16 or 18%. We have people from 45 to 55 years of age that have put in 25 and 30 years in that operation. Think of the tragedy of those people.
Okay, I've got to take a break now. I've been running a bit long, and we'll come up and Gary Young, Trustee Pete Marwick Limited, Gary Young and Doug Evans after the break. Gary Young is a trustee in, Pete Marwick Limited is a trustee in bankruptcy?
Correct.
For L&K?
Pete Marwick Limited is the trustee. I'm a vice president of Pete Marwick Limited.
So you're speaking for the trustee?
I'm speaking for the trustee.
What's the sad story? When are you going to pay the I.W.A. their holiday pay and their severance pay because you've got money enough to do it and they're here waiting for it now and they deserve it?
All right, let's correct one thing on this thing. That mill in North Vancouver is on leased land, Jack. The lease expires in July 1976, okay? The property does not belong to L&K. The people that own the property want it back.
1986.
1986.
Yeah.
1986. That mill is gone, okay, from the site. That's why the Lytle family were building a new mill over at Langdale, okay? So that mill was always going to go. It's gone early. And the reason it's gone early is it can't be operated at today's lumber prices. L&K in 81, 82, and 83 lost almost $12 million in total keeping that mill going.
Right. This is the Bank of Nova Scotia that financed it.
Through that period, the bank loans went up to pay for the losses. And right now, when we got involved in this situation, which was in the spring of 1984, we looked at it. We felt at that time we'd lose $5 million this year running the mill. Now we know the prices we would have had, because the prices in 1984 are lower than 83, and we would have lost $7 to $10 million.
Have you, just let me get one, have you actually been running the mill at any stage since the bankruptcy petition was accepted?
Never ran the mill. The mill was closed by the owners in really around December 1. The plater mill operated for another 2 weeks to clean up. We came into that thing in March. Okay, got involved in March. The mill never operated through that period of time.
And they owe the bank how much?
About $30 million.
Just $30 million. But
No,
I mean,
there are more other assets here.
yeah, that's what I want to ask about.
Okay, I mean, that mill is just one of L&K's assets, okay? They have the Langdale facility, which we're operating. We're employing about 60 people in total, in the office staff and the booming ground people. We have employed approximately 200. We have 200 I.W.A. members or so working in contract loggers for us. We've continued logging throughout this year. Now, we've been accused of exporting logs. We have exported logs. To date, as of the 15th of November, we've exported 25% of the logs we've cut. 75% of the logs that we've cut, they've been logged by Canadians, logged by people in BC, sold in BC, and cut in BC, and produced lumber in BC. Okay? Now, I heard people using here multiplier effects and all the rest. Let's do some multiplier effects on that. We are supplying logs in the BC market, and 3/4 of what we've done to date has gone to that BC market to be cut into lumber.
You really are the employer in succession to the I.W.A., to L&K Lumber.
I'm a trustee in bankruptcy, okay?
But in fact, you're an employer in succession.
I'm not an employer
You're
in
employing
succession.
I.W.A. men, you're cutting logs, you've got permission from, what do you call him, that fella Waterland, to log, despite the fact you're not running a planer mill or a sawmill, right? You got a special exemption.
There will be a sawmill one day at Langdale, okay? It requires, right now, we don't know what's going to require to put the money in. $20 million more to go into that to produce a sawmill?
How much has gone into the development of Langdale?
$22 million to date.
All owed to the bank?
Part of it was was cash that was in the company, was the equity of the company, and part of it was bank bonds.
Okay, let me get this clear. The old mill had to go because the lease expired in 1986 and the land belongs to Vancouver Wharfs or somebody.
You got it. That's right.
So you're still just operating the other thing. When do they get their holiday pay and severance pay in full?
This company, L&K, has very, very large loss carry forwards. And without getting technical about it, those loss carry forwards will be available to a new owner of L&K, which I believe there will be somebody who comes in and buys L&K. I'm negotiating with 2 separate parties right now, all right? And I think there will be a new owner. That owner, when he takes over L&K, will want to use those loss carry forwards.
For tax purposes?
For tax purposes, exactly. And he will then, in order to use those, he has to buy the shares and he has to make a settlement with all of the creditors, which include not just the bank, but it includes government claims, it includes suppliers, and it includes the employees. I can't at this time tell you what that's going to be, but to use those loss carry forwards, he must make a settlement. Otherwise, he won't use them. And those loss carry forwards are very, very large.
So therefore, as a trustee in bankruptcy, your plan at the moment is to take the $22 million investment at Langdale and the logging operation with your exemption and what you're continuing to do with these people and sell it with the income tax advantages to a buyer who must make a proposition to clear off. It might be 50 cents, 80 cents, 90 cents, or 10 cents on the dollar, pay off all creditors before he can take over
the shares.
The shares, which would give him access to the new development at Langdale.
Correct. And you'll also have to complete the mill at Langdale or purchase a mill or fulfill the requirements. Because in the long term, you can't export all our wood here. I mean, there's all this talk of exporting. But large part of our wood, you can't export. You got to cut it here.
But you
people don't want it.
Not to be querulous or critical or cynical, but you're saying that in this market today, you've really got 2 people looking at the prospect of putting up money to buy and finish Langdale in total.
That may be one of their options. One of the other options to do is to sell off all the Langdale sawmill assets, because it is a dryland sort and a booming ground facility, and it's one of the best on the coast. And not build a mill there, but purchase or build a mill somewhere else.
There is no hope of you writing checks to pay their holiday and severance pay at all at the moment.
I don't have the money to do it.
Nothing at all.
Jack, I'm not making huge
Go to the
sums
bank
of
and get the money. Go to the bank and get the money. You're running that mill, or you're running the logging. You're operating like the employer. You've taken it over and you're running it. The $22 million in Langdale is what pulled down the mill in North Vancouver.
No, the lease was expiring, Doug.
Yes, but there was,
out of that.
When we first had discussions with Gary, there was talk of an extension there and a possible extension on that lease.
Yes,
and that talk disappeared because they wanted out of there.
Anyway,
they wanted to get rid of the mill.
Good point, but there's no way that these men can get their money at all until you make a deal on the Limedale property?
I don't know, Jack. As it stands today, the employees are caught in the Canadian Bankruptcy Act. It's an old act. It may not be a particularly appropriate act for these times. The Liberal government introduced a bill, I don't know how many times. I got tired of trying to look at what these new bankruptcy acts were going to be. And they kept introducing new legislation, but never completed it, never got it through a third reading, and it became law in Canada.
That would have put the unpaid wages higher up in the totem pole.
It would have given the employees an absolute priority. Absolute priority.
For wages.
For wages. They didn't define wages very carefully, but whatever wages were, and it could have included, in fact, pension benefits. I don't know, for $2,000 or $4,000.
But as of the moment, every nickel of asset in L&K that's available for whatnot under plain bankruptcy goes to Bank of Nova Scotia.
They are the secured creditor. They have the claim on the assets first.
So it's no good news for you at all, except the possibility of selling it and making a share proposition, in which case they'd have to make a settlement with your people.
The bank will take everything. If they sell it, the bank gets everything. They're the secured creditors.
If we sell the assets, the bank has the first claim on all the assets, Jack. If the purchaser wants those loss carry forwards, and there are large loss carry forwards, we're talking something 25 million, Jack.
Oh, I know.
In losses. That's $12 million in tax shelter. Okay, that is a lot of money. People paid a hell of a lot of money for a lot less tax shelter in the last few years with MERBs and stuff.
A lot of people won't understand that, but the $25 million in losses, which a businessman can use to get a $12 million tax shelter.
Correct. To get those losses, he's got to get the shares. And when he gets the shares, he's got to satisfy all of the creditors.
You know what the man in the street will say, though? And this has nothing to do with your technical knowledge. You sold that the bits and pieces for $450,000. Surely the Bank of Nova Scotia could say, hey, pay the holiday pay, $231,000. It's only fair to these employees of these guys who helped pay the loans in the years gone by. Shouldn't they do that? Pay the holiday pay. You got $450,000 at the auction. I'm not saying you can do it. But if you're listening, Mr. Armour, it would be a great big promotional plug for the Bank of Nova Scotia. Promise to do a 5-minute praise for you if you'll say, pay the holiday pay. That's not fair, is it?
That wasn't fair.
I'll say it again after the break. I've just got time for one segment, really, on the calls. We've done so much detail this morning, but we'll try it. Unless there's anything any one of you gentlemen wants to say before I go to the phones at all. No? They're all happy.
Towards getting these bills done.
I'll take you first. Hold on. Go ahead, please.
Yes, hi. I was wanting to know what concessions that the unions are willing to make, and maybe not taking wage increases or that for the first couple of years, just to get these mills back working again and get these guys going.
Doug?
We want to know when the banks are going to cut the interest rates down to about 8%. When they start cutting interest rates and treating people properly, then maybe we can sit down and do some sensible discussion on wages.
Go ahead, please.
Hello there.
Yes.
It seems like a time for some fairly creative thinking at this particular point in time. There's a suggestion to you that why don't you let the banks go ahead with their foreclosure and the I.W.A. get together and pick up this mill at 10 cents on the dollar or whatever it goes for.
Is that a sensible suggestion to anybody?
It may be down the road, but that isn't the proper way that we want to go about it.
Go ahead, please.
Mr. Webster, one of the problems of British Columbia forest industry is our very high cost of production. It's our low productivity rates and our high rates. It would be a fair question to ask the union people at your table, what was their attitude in the most recent strike in the I.W.A. British Columbia and the shocking settlement that was made after it 2 years ago?
You're talking about the big one?
Yep.
Not the 4. He's talking about, was it 15%?
1981?
Yes.
Yes, in 1981, the settlement was 15% and 13%. At that time, and during the term of that agreement, the employer came to the I.W.A. seeking concessions. And we asked him how his productivity was. In many cases, the productivity in the operations had increased anywhere from 15 to 25%. So he didn't lose anything in the settlements that he made in 1981.
You're picking up another increase on the 15th of June this year, aren't you?
4.5%.
What will that do to the industry, Mr. Smith?
Well, at this time it'll be very difficult because every company on the coast here is losing money. But coming back to what I suggested before, if we can improve on our recovery in this province right here, we can take a step forward and a big leap forward over the way we've
You're talking about the recovery, such as you've done in
about the
Sooke
recovery,
Forest
and that's
Products.
what we have to do.
And you're a trustee. No, you're not a lumberman. You're just running an operation.
You know, the productivity of the men, Jack, is a combination of capital and labor, okay? And to focus in on a pay raise is not productivity, okay? And is not an increase to the employer. If the same men can produce, in his case, a third more, there is no increase.
Yeah, no panic about it. It's the productivity. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'd like to ask, are this mill equipment going to be sold on the open market? In other words, this equipment going to be competition to us from foreign countries in the future?
You mean the auction at L&K?
Yeah. Is it going to be sold within Canada, or are the assets going to be sold out of Canada?
You might have an answer to that.
Some of the assets went to the United States, to some mills in Oregon and California. The bulk of the equipment was bought, I think, by equipment people. It's being incorporated in mills. To my knowledge, no one's building a mill right now on the coast to compete, or no one in the United States is building mills.
Go ahead from Prince George.
I was wondering if there was any help the I.W.A. has been getting from the major shareholders in the TD Bank there. I heard that they were trying to help out the I.W.A. Is that true at all?
Major shareholders in the TD Bank trying to help out the I.W.A.?
Yeah, so they don't close down the mill.
Have you had any of that? Have you had any help from major directors?
I'd like to hear more. I haven't heard anything in that regard.
Just let me get that. Do you know whether the decision was made to move in and run you on a part-time basis? Would that be made in Vancouver or in Toronto?
In Vancouver. I would think in Vancouver.
Made in Vancouver. Go ahead, please. Oh, no, that's not the right one. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning. Mine basically is just a statement. Being an unemployed I.W.A. worker for about 2 years now, since the Bank of Nova Scotia has been so unconsiderate and for the many families that are put on the cold by this, I think that when my mortgage comes up, that the Bank of Nova Scotia can take a hike.
Well, it's a free country, and you should...
it is, but I think that's, like you say, they got $400,000 for the machinery. Why not pay the fellows off? It's a Christmas thing that, in the giving spirit, I think the Bank of Nova Scotia makes money hand over fist. They can afford to spread the wealth. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Doug Evans.
Jack, the tragedy here is that these people have been laid off since December of last year. On December the 1st or the 15th, their unemployment insurance will run out. Many of them have not worked one day since that mill went down. They're owed holiday pay for 1983, and surely they're entitled to that holiday pay.
Unemployment insurance will run out when?
In December.
Because they've been off a year.
They've been off a year as of December.
Well, I'm not going to take any more calls on this. We'll only diffuse the directness of the program. We've been recapitulating this morning some of the problems. And I've been lucky enough to have Hershell Smith of Sooke Forest Products here this morning, who is waiting on tenterhooks to see what the courts do with the action by the Toronto Dominion Bank to petition it into bankruptcy after the bank gave them some extensions from time to time. And the situation is that it would seem that banks can't run sawmills as well as the people who know the business. But thanks for coming. Gary Young, a trustee, very helpful indeed, from Pete Marwick Limited in explaining the situation about L&K Lumber. Doug Evans of the I.W.A. In Vancouver, Terry Lewis, New Westminster, Terry Smith, New Westminster, Roger Lewis. And I'm going to say again, they sold the mill for $450,000 to bits and pieces. I think, and I agree with you, that they should pay the holiday pay for Christmas out of that money and be kind and generous.
Absolutely, Jack.
I'm not asking you to relay that message in any way, shape, or form. I'm merely saying it publicly. Fine bank, a great bank, would have a much better image if it stuck in that $231,000 holiday pay for the guys played off at L&K.
Could I ask, I'd like to leave a challenge with you. You have a great number of viewers in this province, and I would like to say to you, how about you leading something to call the Minister of Forestry, to call officials from the bank, to call officials from the union, to call officials from the company for a meeting. Get everybody in one room and see if there isn't some way to do this. And I think it'd be something which you in your own manner could give some leadership to. There's a challenge to you.
I am not I'm maybe a mediator, but I'm not a good negotiator. But what I will do is I'll call the Minister of Forests. I'll call the new Minister of Forests if he knows a tree when he sees one. I'll call Carney, and I'll put as much pressure on as I can to know why we can't be treated like Chrysler. Why can't we can't have emergency government help to keep industries going in a hard-pressed British Columbia. That's it. I'll be back after the break with the Coquitlam teachers' problems after the break. I nearly fell off my chair in the living room last night when I watched Heinrich making petulant statements about how unhappy he would be if anybody dared to lobby the Department of Education on the effect of their financial policies on the hiring and firing of teachers. And our friend Mr. Heinrich, beyond comprehension. But here's a little bit of what he said in Victoria at his press conference yesterday.
I am not prepared to respond to the type of pressures which will be mounted by them, either through the media or by major lobby groups. I have been through this before.
Well, now there's a nice attitude. He's not prepared to respond to pressure. In other words, he's right. He couldn't possibly be wrong. He's right, and any of you cheeky people go to the media and complain about the actions of our God-given social credit government, he'll go hide in the corner. And I would suggest that when he hides in the corner, after that petulant behavior, he puts a bleeding big dunce's cap on his head and be given 100 lines to write. I promise to be a good boy in future and not to be so spiteful, petulant, and bad-tempered. And I mean that. I think it was an appalling display for a cabinet minister. Having said that, I have in my studio this morning Jonathan Taylor, the chairman of Coquitlam School Board, and Christine Fritz from the Coquitlam PTA. What's the bottom line on the teaching situation in Coquitlam now that you have received the details of your goodies from Mr. Heinrich?
Mr. Webster, I wonder if, before I respond to that, if I can just comment on Mr. Heinrich's remarks, because later in that tape and in the newspaper, he's quoted as singling out Coquitlam as being one of those districts who, having made arguments about the wisdom of priorities that he has indicated will not have the ear of the ministry. And I think the minister's reaction, and in addition, I endorse your comments entirely, but the minister's reaction tells us two things, it seems to me. Firstly, it tells us that quite clearly the government understands the very deep depth of feeling of people against the education restraint cutbacks. That what we've been saying in Coquitlam is accurate. The community at large does not support any longer the fiscal restraint in education, and that our action in Coquitlam is being effective. It is clear from his reaction that he is concerned that our position as a board and as a community will take place across the province, and I think it will. The second thing it tells us, and this relates to your comments, is it gives us, sadly, an insight into the political code of ethics of Mr. Heinrich and perhaps the government. And I, as an individual trustee, and I know my community reacted very strongly and negatively to Mr. Heinrich's implied threat last night. I resent the suggestion that in our democracy, a community and school trustees who take fair and a strong position against an educational cutback program can be expected to be penalized by the government. It not only penalizes parents and school trustees, it penalizes children. I think that that's an outrageous implication in terms of political morality, and I think that the minister should be embarrassed and ashamed of himself, and this government should be. I think he's also terribly naive if he thinks that that is going to affect any school trustee in British Columbia or any parent not to make him painfully aware of the fact that his program is hurting children.
Who was it that said that Coquitlam School District has an irreproachable record for fiscal responsibility? In other words, that you're very good. Who was that Parks?
Well, that was Mr. Parks, acknowledged that that was the record could not be disputed that we have. And Mr. Heinrich in the Sun was quoted last night as saying we have been a district which hasn't planned well. Mr. Heinrich knows better, but he simply is not prepared to face the strength of our argument, which is that the community does not support what is becoming a vicious program in cutting back education. Mr. Heinrich knows that, and he yet takes a public position saying that the alternate is the case. Mr. Parks, of course, was not able before his own community to pass that judgment off. Our community knows that's not the case.
Many people walked out after hearing Parks last night, I believe.
Well, I should say that for the most part, people listened fairly courteously to Mr. Parks for a considerable period of time. At a certain point, it became apparent, though, that Mr. Parks was reading from a government ministry publication which has been prepared for people such as themselves. He was talking about problems generally in education. They weren't specific to our district, and much of what he said simply was meaningless.
No, he didn't know what he was talking about. Christine, Fritz, how did you feel about both Heinrich's remarks and Parks' performance last night and the position faced by the school trustees?
Well, I think we were all extremely disappointed with Mr. Parks' reaction and some of his comments. I think most people walked out of the meeting when he informed us that health care was BC's #1 concern and education was BC's #2 concern. Most parents in Coquitlam, I don't seem to feel that this is the case. People are angry, people are confused. I think a number of people tend to stand behind the school board. They seem to are being penalized for the fact that they have been fiscally responsible.
The good boards are the ones that
That's
get hit.
right.
I'm going to get down to some detail on what time I have with Jonathan Taylor, Chairman of Coquitlam School Board, and Christine Fritz from Coquitlam PTA after the break. Well, it would seem from Heinrich's remarks that Vancouver are good boys and they got an extra $1 million and they're not making a noise. Now, what does the new budget do to you? What's the effect on the teaching and the system in Coquitlam?
In Coquitlam, if the government, Mr. Heinrich, persists in funding us at the level he has indicated in his preliminary budget, teacher layoffs, a loss of teaching positions, if we cut everything we possibly can out of an already restrained budget, assuming that there is no salary increase, the bottom line in teaching lost positions is 100, going up from there depending upon the other factors.
100 out of how many teachers?
Well, we had originally, we've lost about 78 or 79 positions already through the restraint program. We've been tooling down, we've had to do that. This would be another 100 positions on a current teaching force of around 1,180 or 1,200 teachers.
That's about 10%.
That's right.
Now, are you going to have to cut programs too?
Well, one of the anomalies is that because of the government's just amazing planning, introducing this short budget year with only a very few months' notice to us, is that we will have to make these substantial cuts in the middle of a school year. We have a number of temporary teachers who by law and by collective agreement have to be laid off before permanent staff. And those temporary teachers are in certain programs. If they happen to be, as in Coquitlam, there's a considerable number of them in French immersion because it's a new growing program with new young teachers. It means we have no flexibility. We have to let those teachers go.
And so you'll ruin the program or scrap it altogether?
Well, we will do our best as a responsible board, as we always have been, to consult with our public and try to come up with a way to maintain a vestige of the French immersion.
Does it mean school closures?
Oh, we are considering now school closures. We have closed a school last year. If we had known in advance that we would be expected to have this short budget year, we could have looked at the other schools more closely last year, but we didn't know until after we'd gone through that process.
Bad planning by Victoria.
Well, you know, one of my fellow trustees has commented, and for a government that presents itself as a business government, it's a funny way to run a bake sale.
What do you foresee with 100 teachers away? Because there's no hope to Jonathan for a moment of you getting the money that you want.
Well, no,
is there now? Because he said, no, you're noisy people, you're troublesome people, you're not even going to listen to you.
Well, Mr. Heinrich says that because he knows what his poll tells him. His polls tells him they're in very deep difficulty. He is trying to intimidate trustees in the community. I am certain it won't work. And my view of the democratic process and all my political experience tells me that if in fact the government knows that they are on absolutely irretrievable ground, they will respond, albeit grudgingly, as they should, and responsibly.
What do you feel about it? Well, what will this do to your attitude towards the teaching and the system in Coquitlam?
Well, at this point, I'd like to say I am not a teacher, but I feel it is a sort of a terrible situation at this point, and an intolerable situation at this point, that there seems to be a political stalemate. No one seems to be taking the children into consideration. Children will be switching schools, they will be switching teachers, they will be switching out of programs. Who's going to pick up the cost, for instance, on French immersion children who have been taught in French and now they are without a teacher and are going to be put back into an English program? They have taken away the support systems as far as teaching aids to help these children, learning assistance. All sorts of programs are going to be gutted, from enrichment to special education, special needs children. All of these programs are going to be cut.
Are you planning to ask Heinrich to meet with you?
We're meeting with their MLAs shortly. We plan to attempt to meet with the minister and to take our fair arguments to him as soon as possible, and we hope that the minister by that time impressed with our community's reaction, and I'm sure by that time impressed with the reaction of many, many other trustees and most of the communities in British Columbia, will be much more sensitive to our position.
And you're prepared to go and see him in Victoria?
We certainly are, and I suspect...
And you're prepared to lobby him in direct defiance of his instructions? He says you will not be lobbied.
We are all required as citizens to take part in the political process, regardless of what people with the narrow perspective of Mr. Heinrich would have us do.
Do you endorse those remarks?
I sure do. What type of a democracy do we have when you can't publicly lobby the officials you elected into office?
That's how the system is supposed to work, to lobby them.
That's right.
God, it was always worse than Mulrooney's, it would seem. One last question. Has enrollment gone up for children?
Coquitlam has had a slight unprojected enrollment decrease, and that has exacerbated our problem. But the main problem is the continuing restraint program and the problems with the poorly introduced short budget year.
My thanks to Jonathan Taylor, Chairman of Coquitlam School Board, and to Christine Fritz of Coquitlam PTA. And I'll be back after the break. I'm going to see my doctor tomorrow morning. And he's also your doctor. His name is Gerald Carr. He's the president-elect of the BC Medical Association. And I wonder how he feels about the government's plans to freeze their wages, to cap their fees for service, and many other controversial items. At 9 a.m. precisely. I lost the name. Just give me a second, doctor.
Gerald Carr.
No, give me a phrase.
Our doctors make too much. Our doctors overpaid in BC. Capping doctors' incomes. Putting a lid. Amputating.
Just a label, okay.
Yeah, that's right. Cutting their dicks off.
Ready.
Okay, rolling and recording.
Dr. Gerald Carr, BC Medical Association, at 9 a.m. precisely. That's not Sooke, that's L&K.
Well, do that. Christmas present. Thinking of a Christmas present. 160 guys from L&K Lumber. Road to holiday.
Let's go.
So we're rolling. Sermon on the Mounds of Barnaby. Out of town. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3.
A Merry Christmas to the Bank of Nova Scotia. I know I'm a little bit early in my good wishes, but boy, could they make it a Merry Christmas for the 160 men whose jobs have gone forever from L&K Lumber in North Vancouver. The L&K mill was auctioned the other day for $450,000. Now, I know the bank doesn't have to do it, but these men, who are really at the end of careers and see no hope, are owed $231,000 holiday pay. The bank doesn't have to do it, but boy, would it be a great Christmas present for the 160 men. Take the, fouled it.